Kim Ades is a leadership coach. She has an extremely unique view on how she coaches leaders. And we're not just talking in business, we're talking leadership in families and in other areas. She has great content on her site. She, oh my goodness, she believes in coaching in adversity and leading in adversity, talks about the difference between coaching and therapy, and I discussed the difference between leadership and management. There's always been confusion in my organizations about that with a lot of people. We get into a pretty good discussion about discipline, and she has very unique views that differ from me on how she views discipline, especially in leadership. I think you're really going to like it. It's a very interesting take on. She brings up a movie that you may or may not all know. I don't. Maybe I'll tease you with it. The Officer and the Joe. I think you're gonna like listening to Kim Ades. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz. People ask me, how did I lose 130 pounds? The quick answer is always discipline. I started my business, wasn't paying attention to my health, was eating too much, drinking too much sweets. My daughter was born. Next thing I know, I'm pre-diabetic. I have hypertension. I knew something had to change. Discipline. I, like many of you, have faced many challenges in your career, in your family, in your life, in your faith. How did you attack them? How did you approach them? How did you solve them, hopefully? It all had to have some degree of discipline. I'm also asked, how did you found and start a tech business? And it lasted over 25 years. Discipline. I was committed to it, enjoyed technology, didn't enjoy some aspects of it, but knew it was necessary. Discipline. Our podcast mission: how do we use discipline to better ourselves and society? Join me, please, as I talk to interesting people and discuss how they use discipline in their family and their passion and their careers and how it helped them. Our podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Joey Pin's Discipline Conversations. It'll be light and serious. Join us, please. Thank you for consideration. So nice to meet you.
Great to meet you.
I've watched so much. I feel I know you well.
Really?
What's the difference between leadership and management?
Well, let's talk about that. When we look at a leader takes a position of being inspiring. They're inspiring people to take action and think in a certain way and get on board with a vision. When a person is managing, they are, let's say, taking care of more of the making sure people are doing the right thing. And so they're managing the elements to get people to do what they need to do. So from my perspective, I always want to help people lead it and rather than manage. I think management is really heavy lifting. It's harder to do than leading in some ways because leading requires you to have a lot of faith in your team and allows you to give people a lot of leeway and rope, whereas managing requires a lot more involvement, a lot more rolling up your sleeves, a lot more um, examination of what's getting done and what isn't getting done. Whereas leadership assumes people come to the table with a high degree of accountability. Management requires you to hold them accountable. That's the difference.
Hmm. So, manager can often not be a leader. Would you agree?
100%. Many managers are very concerned about getting the job done. And so they work with what they can work with in order to get the job done. And they forget about leadership. It's not one and the same at all.
I over the years, I opened a business, and I've had many managers who felt that they were leaders, and I'd have to have this kind of discussion. Can somebody that's reporting to a manager be a leader?
Can a person who's reporting to a manager, absolutely, anyone can be a leader.
Right.
Anyone can be a
I
leader,
agree.
even if they're reporting to someone who maybe is managing and not leading. 100%. And so, what is required of a leader in order for them to lead? A leader thinks differently. A leader approaches things differently. A leader sees opportunity when other people don't. A leader um, steps forward in the faces of uncertainty, and they take chances when they don't necessarily have clarity about what the outcomes might be. So leader, to me, a leader fundamentally thinks differently, and what I've seen is that leaders tend to think in true leaders, exceptional leaders tend to use a set of thinking strategies to guide their decision making, their actions, and their strategic choices. That's what I see.
Now, does a leader need to be trained? Are they taught leadership at a young age? How does one become a leader?
I would say that some leaders have leadership comes to them very naturally, or it's kind of instilled in them from a very young age. But many leaders are taught, and many leaders are coached, and many leaders can develop those leadership skills through the span of their experience and their career. So it's not something that everybody comes to the table with equally, right? Like it's just like some people are better at sports than others. They're just more naturally talented. Same thing with leadership. That doesn't mean other people can't learn or get there.
Anyone can become a leader. Do you agree?
I think anyone has the capacity to become a leader. I don't think everybody wants to be a leader, but those people who do want to be a leader, certainly they have the ability to improve their leadership skills. Absolutely, hands down, no question about that.
But we never see leadership in someone's title.
We
Why
don't
is
see
that?
we don't see, Kim Ades leader of the
Right.
company, right? But
Right.
leadership is in a way couched in the title, right? So if my job is president of the company, then that assumes a leadership role. So we do see the concept of leadership in the titles that are out there, although it doesn't say leader per se. It also doesn't say cheerful person. It doesn't say smart person. It doesn't say wise person. It doesn't say, old and grumpy. It doesn't say any of those. And so I think leadership is a way to describe someone as opposed to a title.
Hmm. We see manager, we see director, we see president, vice president. Can a CEO not be a leader?
I think it's difficult for a CEO to get to that position without leadership skills. I would say that. However, people can decide to become a CEO of their own company and have very
Right.
poor leadership skills, for sure. They have leadership that is assigned to them due to their position as opposed to their natural abilities or their natural talents. It's possible. It's just, I don't think they're going to be successful for very long.
Right. And you talk a lot about leading in adversity.
I talk about
Please explain.
resilience. I talk about
Yeah.
resilience. And so, what I really talk about is that extraordinary leaders have a high degree of emotional resilience. And what I really mean by that is that extraordinary leaders have the ability to bounce back from adversity with speed and agility, but not only bounce back, like when something bad happens to you, okay, like we fall and we get back up. But extraordinary leaders do something with their negative experience. They leverage that adversity somehow and turn it into an advantage. And I've seen that over and over and over again with people who really have had a rich set of experiences and turn those experiences into something that has value.
So, doesn't it really depend on how bad the failure was?
No,
Um,
no,
Give me
I
an
don't think
example.
so.
No.
You could have someone who they start a business and then, it doesn't work out, they go bankrupt. So what do they do with that? They can choose to say, okay, well, I guess I'm not meant to start a business. They could choose to say, well, I've learned a lot from it. I'm going to go start something else and I'm not going to make the same mistakes I did. They can
Hmm.
choose to say, now that I understand where I went wrong, I can help other, startups and make sure they don't make the same mistakes. I can do a lot with this experience. I have lots of choices. And so those people who are exceptionally successful take those experiences where things went wrong and turn them into something good. Other people might say, well, that was a terrible experience. Let me kind of tuck my tail in between my legs and let's never
Hmm.
talk about that again. right? And then they say, well, like, I don't want that experience again, so I'm going to stay far away from anything that exposes me to that possibility. So they shrink instead of expand. And what I see is that leaders who use their experiences as an expansion mechanism get to a better place and they achieve remarkable goals.
Hmm. But if the leader's within an organization and they do something, yeah, cataclysmic, they may be removed from their position, they may be removed from the company. But your point is, do they have the resiliency to bounce back? If they do, then they're a true leader.
I would say to you that resilience is one of the key and most prominent characteristics of exceptional leaders.
Hmm. And so you help coach people to become better leaders.
Yes. So that specifically. And what I see is that exceptional leaders have a different way of thinking about things. And what I do is I look at how leaders think and how their thinking impacts their decisions, their behaviors, and ultimately their results. And so when a leader comes to me and says, I'm not happy with this result I'm getting, I don't
Hmm.
say, well, the old adage, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got.
Hmm.
It's flawed. There's something wrong with that view of things because the truth is, if you always think what you always thought, you'll always get what you always got. But most people, they just say, I'm not getting the results I want. I must be doing something wrong. So I better go figure that out and do something different. So they right away jump into taking a different course of action when they haven't really examined the thinking that took them to this spot in the first place. And so what I want to do is say, wait a second, don't take any action. Don't rush and do anything new. Let's examine your thinking and let's examine how your thinking leads you to creating areas where you're frustrated and stuck, where you create problems for yourself. And let's undo that. And let's line up your thinking with your goals first and then take action. And when somebody's thinking is lined up with their goals, the action that they take naturally follows and naturally leads them to the goals and the results they're looking for. So people jump forward and they say, I need to do something different. But doing is the second part of the equation. The first
Hmm.
part of the equation is the thinking component. And many people skip over that.
They're too reactionary.
Well, they say, like, whatever I'm doing now isn't working. I need to go find another strategy. So I'm going to go do something else. And then they use a different strategy without addressing the thinking behind either strategy,
Hmm.
right? It's kind of like if you want a dog to wag his tail, you don't take the tail and shake it, right? That's not how we do it. And yet, why wouldn't we do that, right? Because tail needs to wag a dog needs to wag its tail. It's a behavior. So we don't ask the dog to change his behavior by looking at the tail. We don't do that. And yet
Hmm.
humans do that.
Is that the number one kind of trait that you see that leaders don't have? Just not being able to think through problems correctly like that?
I see. Well, I'll tell you. Let's back up. I think
Sure.
that emotional resilience is a muscle that leaders need to build. And part of the challenge that people have in building this muscle is that they have a series of blind spots that they cannot see or have access to. So, I will tell you this, your thinking plays the single most important role in your success. However, there's a problem with that because unfortunately, most of your thinking is by and large invisible to you. In other words, you're
Hmm.
not aware of your thinking and you're not aware of how your thinking impacts your outcomes or your results. Right? So now we have a gap that we have to fill. We have to figure this out. If your thinking plays the number one role, but your thinking is inaccessible to you, how do we figure this out? So, what I do is help my clients see their thinking and gain access to it so that it's no longer a blind spot. And when you understand the role that your thinking plays in everything you do, hear, smell, taste, and touch, Now you can make smarter decisions. Now you can decide what you want to do with it. And you can assess whether or not your thinking is actually leading you to the outcomes you want. And very often, our thinking leads us away from the outcomes we want.
I don't understand what you mean when you say they don't see their thinking.
So, if someone is struggling with, I'll give you a perfect example. I might say to somebody, hey, like what I want you to do is I want you to do a presentation on chemistry. Joey, can you do that tomorrow? Can you do a presentation on chemistry?
That's a bit ambiguous. Could you narrow it down a bit?
I don't know. Can you do a presentation on the scientific background of the skin, the way your skin reacts in different environmental conditions? Can you do that tomorrow?
I still need a little bit more information.
Okay. So, and why do you need information?
Well, I need to know who the audience is. I need to know how long it's going to be. There's still some facts there that I don't have.
Okay. But what you're really saying is, with the information I'm giving you, I don't feel equipped to do that. And
That's
I don't
true.
know, Joey, are you a scientific expert? Are you a chemistry guy? Do you know
I
about?
actually, no, I'm kidding. No, no, I'm not.
Okay. So, so a normal conversation might, it's interesting that you're asking for more information, but
Yeah.
maybe in the back of your head, you're going, she's setting me up, so I'm going to ask enough questions to like get to the
Yeah.
source of this, right? But the reason why most people might say no is because they say, well, I'm not equipped for that. I don't, I never went to school in chemistry and I don't know much about skin balance and pHs and environmental conditions. By the way, I just pulled that out of thin air,
That's
right? Like
random. That's it.
totally random. And most people would say, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go up. I'm not going to get that done because I'm not equipped. And so the truth is, can you go quickly look up this information and actually pull off a presentation? Probably. But that's not your knee jerk reaction. Your knee jerk reaction is, that's not my field. That's not what I do.
Hmm.
That's not what I'm good at. That's not my expertise. I don't know who the audience is. I don't know how good this has to be. And on and on and on and on. And you've created a whole entire dialogue inside your head about why not,
Hmm.
right? And so I'll give you another example. I do a lot of presentations and I love interactive presentations because they're a lot more fun. So I always ask for a volunteer, whether it's an audience of 20, 100, 200, 800, doesn't matter. I ask for a volunteer. Do you know how many volunteers I get?
No.
One if I'm lucky. If I'm lucky. The question is why? Why don't I get like everybody volunteering? They bring me in to teach people things. And what's the best position to learn from? By doing, right? You know that. Everybody knows that.
Sure.
So you know it consciously, but you still don't put up your hand. You still don't rush to the stage to be my volunteer. Why? Because there's a dialogue that goes on in their heads that sounds something like this. I don't know what she wants from me. I don't know who she is. I'm just going to sit and wait. I don't want to embarrass myself, and so on. Except here's the thing, the people aren't conscious
Hmm.
of that dialogue. It's there. They're not aware
I
that it's
see.
there. And that's what I mean by they don't see it.
Hmm.
And they don't see that that dialogue doesn't in any shape or way align with their goals. And their goal is, I want to accelerate my learning. I want to learn so much so fast so that I can move forward, so that I can reach my goal, so I can perform better, so I can feel better, so I can, you know, um, move up in my career, so that I can increase my revenues, whatever, be a better parent, right? That's the goal. But they forget their goal. And they say, I'm just going to stay in my chair because it's safer here.
Very interesting. I never quite heard it expressed like that. You have a lot of great kind of advice videos where you kind of go over a certain
Concept.
subject and you kind of debunk it. Or one was I found interesting on affirmations.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of affirmations.
And no, you're not.
I'm not a fan of affirmations. Why? Because What's the recommendation? Go stand in the mirror and repeat the same phrase over and over and over until you finally buy it, right? Until
Believe
you
it. Yeah.
finally believe it. And there's a saying and the saying is, if you repeat the same thought over and over again, it finally becomes a belief. It sounds like a good plan, right? Sounds totally reasonable. And it sounds very positive and affirming, doesn't it?
Mm.
Here's the thing, though, that if you stand in the mirror and say something to yourself that you fundamentally don't believe, that you don't buy, what actually happens is you create a bigger gap between where you are and where you want to be. So if I stand in the mirror and go, wow, I'm the hottest thing since Farrah Fawcett, right?
Mm.
The back of my head is kind of going, who are you kidding? And the back of my head always wins. It's the true beliefs that you have in the back of your head that always trump everything else. Always. And so what happens is I'm like, geez, I'm not even close to Farrah Fawcett, right? And what happens is I create a bigger divide between myself, where I am, and where I want to be. And so affirmations kind of undermine the purpose of affirmations, which is to help you feel better about yourself. That's the purpose of affirmations, theoretically. But
Mm.
it doesn't actually work because always the back of your mind, that conversation that you have in the back of your mind, that's that's the voice that always wins. And so my job is to say, what is the conversation in the back of your mind? Let's hear it. What is it saying? And now let's see, is it actually true? Or did you make it up? And most people are making things up all day, every day. We make things up. And we make them things up so well. We're so effective at doing that we believe what we've made up is actually true.
Now, what if it's a softer affirmation? Perhaps not as far as Farrah Fawcett, but as I will meditate every day, or I
And what if you
will.
don't? What if you miss a day?
Yeah. So I don't really do affirmations, but as far as I know, is that the idea is to hopefully ingrain it into yourself. But if it's a bit softer than the loftier goal that you mentioned, perhaps it's more achievable. I guess that's what I'm tossing out there.
So I have another technique for doing that. But let's just go back there for a minute. And you're kind of touching on a whole bunch of interesting things. What if I say, I
Mm.
will meditate every day? I will meditate every day. I will meditate every day. And I meditate day one, day two, day three, week one, week two, week three. But week four, you know what? On that day, my son calls me and says, Mom, can you help me move?
Mm.
And I'm like, of course, right? Because it's my son and I love my son. And there's no more important, no greater priority as a mother than her children. So I go and help my son. And by the time I get home, I'm dead tired because I'm lifting boxes and I'm moving things. And we ate pizza because, that's what you do when you move, right?
Yes, that's the price.
And
Yeah.
I get home and I'm tired and I go to sleep. And the next day I'm like, oh, bleep. Oh, damn. I missed my meditation. Now what? What do I do when I look in the mirror the next day? I'm like, I made a promise to myself and I didn't keep.
Hmm.
I suck. I'm useless. I can't even keep that one promise to myself.
Wow.
If I can't keep a promise to myself, how good am I? Do you see what just happened?
Yeah, if you say you're useless and you can't keep a promise yourself, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. So, what do you recommend? I know you're heavy into journaling as well. I guess that's similar.
Well, no, it's not similar. We ask our clients to journal in an online journal with their coach. And so what happens is at the beginning of the week, we give them a journaling prompt or a question, and they start journaling. And every time they journal, their coach reads in response to their journal. And really, the response to the journal is a series of inquiry, right? We're understanding who they are, how they're wired. We're trying to look for their patterns of behavior, their patterns of beliefs, how they see the world. And we're trying to
Hmm.
understand this really critical relationship between the way they think and the outcomes they're getting. Because people come from coaching because they're not so happy with the results they're getting, right? So if you're not so happy with the results you're getting, let's understand not only what you're doing to get the results, but how you're thinking. And let's look at how your thinking is leading you to taking actions or not actions that lead you to the results you're getting. And so my job is to unfold all of that and to see the big picture and to really start with the seed of all of this, which is, how are you thinking? What do you believe to be true? What's the conversation you're having in the back of your head? And how is that conversation leading you to the outcomes you're getting? And is that conversation truly aligned with what you want? And what we often find is that conversation not only is not aligned, it takes them away from what they want. Once people see what they're doing that they didn't see before, once people have access to that, when people realize that they're feeding themselves lies, untruths, then they
Hmm.
go, oh my God, I'm fighting with everybody else in the world. But the truth is, I'm causing myself the biggest problem. And what happens is they start to calm down and they start to lessen their attempt to control others and events and other. They start to decrease their intent to manage. Right, we started this conversation with
Yeah.
management. They start to decrease their desire and their attempts to manage, and they start to increase their self-control. And when they increase their self-control, their results start to improve. It's like a magic how it happens.
Yeah.
It's super powerful. And that's the role that journaling plays. It helps us understand what's going on. It provides us with many, many data points. It also provides this constant communication between coach and client. And that constant communication is very, very vital to help a client to move from point A to point B.
Now, is leadership that we're discussing, is it always in a business setting? Or can it be
No,
with family? Could it be with,
absolutely.
like, what are some other examples?
I'll give
Excuse
you a
me.
perfect example. One day I was doing a presentation for a group of entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs. They ran formidable businesses. And I ended up connecting with one gentleman. And as we were talking, after the meeting was over, he said, I have a lot of rage. And I said, well, what does that mean? Like, are you punching walls? Like, what are you doing? He's like, yeah, I get really angry. I throw chairs, I punch walls. I said, do you have children? He said, yes. I said, and what do you do when you're angry with your children? He said, I hit them.
Hmm.
And I have 5 kids. And for me, hitting kids is not a good thing.
Yeah.
I'm being plain, right? Like I'm telling you what I think about things, and I have a judgment about that for sure. And yet I said, you know what? I'd really love to coach you because I really think I can make a massive difference in your life.
Hmm.
And what we discovered was that when his kids behaved the way they were behaving, as children do, he perceived that as a lack of respect. And he got so angry about what was going on that he lashed out. And he started to realize that when he hits his children, he's showing his children that when things don't go the way he wants them to go, it's okay to get angry. It's okay to lash out. It's okay to express rage. It's okay to hit. And what do you think his kids were doing? Lashing out, expressing rage, being a little violent sometimes. And so he started to understand a few things. Number one is their children, their behavior is not a reflection of how much they love you or respect you. Number two is your behavior isn't teaching them what you want from them. Your behavior is teaching them exactly what you don't want from them. Number three, what do you think your
Hmm.
kids actually want from you? And are you giving them what they need? Why do you think they're behaving the way they are? They're looking for some attention. And so, what are ways for you to give them positive attention? And when they're not behaving the way you want them to behave, what are ways that you can remove yourself from the situation so that you don't express rage and give them an opportunity to manage their emotional state so that they can calm down and come to you when they're a little bit more prepared to do so? So, you're demonstrating the behavior you want. And you're teaching the behavior you want, and you're giving them time to calibrate themselves. Well, it was a game changer for him. Game changer, right? Does he get mad? Yes. Does he take himself out of the situation now when he gets mad? Yes. Is he an amazing father now? 100%. And so, we think about leadership in a work context, but I think that the most important place that leadership needs to happen is in families, in homes, with children, as parents.
Very interesting. I mean, you're bordering kind of psychology there, right? You have a lot of video. Well, you have videos where your daughter on Friday kind of presents to you these great scenarios, and one that I really found interesting was the mother-in-law, and I was reminded of the show Everybody Loves Raymond, where the mother-in-law comes over and starts, recleaning things, and she kind of presents this case to you, and you give your feedback on it. It was fascinating, and there was a few of these. I really enjoyed that.
Yes, it's called Fridays with Fernie. My daughter's name is Fernie. I have 5 kids. She's my youngest, and she's the only daughter. And we're very, very close. And so every week she comes to me with a case. And by the way, these cases are not cases that I've heard of before. She just brings them to me out of the blue. I
Mhm.
never know what I'm going
Yep.
to get.
They're cold. Yeah,
They're
yeah.
right. And sometimes I'm like, oh my God. She's making them tougher and tougher every week. But yeah, she gives me situations. Sometimes they're parenting situations, sometimes they're business situations, and we work through them together and we discuss them. And it's interesting because I don't really have the client exactly in front of me, so I can't ask all
Right.
the questions I'd like to ask, but I try to make some leaps of faith there. But yes, it's live coaching on the spot. I also coach I also coach leaders live and on the spot. They come onto the podcast and they give me their greatest challenge, and we do coaching right there on the spot. And really, what I'm looking for is how do people think, and how their thinking translates into their communication, their decision making, their actions, and whether or not that thinking is truly in line with what they're after in life.
Hmm. Now, does she are these stories fiction? Does she have readers that
Does
write
she have
in? Does she
inspiration? Yeah, she has inspiration. She goes to all her friends, she goes to people she knows, she asks, other adults that she's around. And she definitely has many, many sources of inspiration for her
It's a
stories.
great idea, and it's very entertaining, and it's, educational as well. I really enjoyed them. Kim, does it take 2 to tango?
So most people think it does, right? But here's the thing, like, it's an interesting question, and really what I'm so the answer is no, it doesn't take two to tango. But what I'm really after is this, is like, if you and I are dancing, right? We're on the dance floor, we're dancing, and suddenly I decide to change the dance steps. Change the moves. All of a sudden, the dance changes. And one of two things can happen. You can join me in this new dance, and now we're dancing something else. Or you can say, what's she doing? I don't want to do that. And you can leave the dance floor. Either way, I'm doing my dance, right? And here's the thing, I didn't need your buy in. I didn't need you to agree. I didn't need to ask you first. I didn't need to discuss it with you first. I needed to decide the dance that I wanted to do, right? And so oftentimes people think that, well, I need somebody else's agreement. I need someone else's buy in. I
Hmm.
can't just do my dance alone. I need them to agree to this dance. And so what happens is sometimes people come to coaching and say, I'm really having a hard time in this relationship. So should we both come for counseling, for coaching? And they usually trip up the word and use counseling instead of coaching.
Mm.
And I say, no, doesn't take two to tango. I just need one person to decide to dance differently in this relationship. So if you're both at each other and fighting a lot, I need one person to decide to stop fighting. Then what happens? The other person can say, okay, fine, I'm not going to fight either. Or they're going to say, wait a minute, why isn't this person fighting? It's not fun anymore. And then they walk away. Right? So I don't need to coach two people at the same time. We can. We all have different coaches for each of them. But at the end of the day, it only takes one person to decide to change the dynamic in this relationship. That's it.
Very interesting. Yeah, and there's your parallel right there. What is the difference between counseling and coaching?
Um, like counseling and coaching, therapy and coaching. So for me, coaching is really about the possibilities. It's really about deciding what you want and helping you chart a path to getting what you want. And sometimes that really just means, helping you know that what you want is possible and helping you kind of uncover the beliefs that prevent you from thinking it's so and taking the actions that lead you to those outcomes. Whereas therapy is a little bit different. Therapy, I feel, is very much focused on the past, focused on the problem, focused on understanding why the problem came to be and what the cause is, etc.
Hmm.
From a coaching standpoint, like we want to sometimes understand the root cause, but only so we can understand the present. We're not planning on going to fix the past. The past is the past. The past helps us understand if some of those patterns still exist today. Other than that, it doesn't really matter. We want to move forward. So, like, I was married very young. I got married at 20 years old. And by the time I was 35, I was having a hard time in my marriage and we decided to go our separate ways. But before we finalized that decision, we decided to go for marriage counseling. And, my husband at the time came with me and he wasn't really much into counseling. And so he came for one session and he said, I'm out of here. This is not for me. Okay. But I continued to go see this counselor. And I remember the first week, I had so much on my mind and so much in my heart. Like I just sat on the couch and bawled for a whole hour. And the second week, the same thing. The third week, I was still crying. I remember I'd leave the place feeling like a total rag, like, like worn out, exhausted,
Hmm.
because I had so much to get off my chest. And by week 4, I started to like feel a bit better. But by week 5, I'm like, wow, this relationship is kind of weird, right? And I remember going into his office and sitting on the couch and going, so what's new with you? Because I felt like there was this weird inequity in this relationship, right? I was going in and he was asking me to spill my guts and he was just sitting there listening to me. And I felt like this is not a good relationship, right? This doesn't feel good to me. Coaching has a different kind of relationship, especially in this in the kind of coaching that we do, right? It's called frame of mind coaching. And what we do is we help the client and the coach have an extraordinary relationship. Because when you trust me, you're gonna row with me. You're gonna go the distance with me. You're gonna go on this wild trip with me. If you don't trust me, if we don't have a good relationship, you're not going anywhere.
Hmm.
And so that relationship component is really, really critical. It's very important. So I always tell clients, yes, you're getting coached, but understand this is a decision you make together. You're getting involved in coaching together. And yes, the intention is for the coach to have an impact on the client, but you need to understand you will have an impact on the coach too. This is not a one-way relationship.
Hmm.
And so it's very, very vital that there's intimacy and closeness and trust in this relationship. And it's also very important for the client to understand that they play a role in this relationship, that they have impact, that they will leave an indelible mark on the coach as well. And so they must come to the coaching relationship with a sense of responsibility.
Interesting. Do all leaders need to be coached?
I think there's a benefit. It's kind of like saying, hey, do all leaders need to know how to read financial statements? No, but I think it's smart. I think there's a benefit, right? Of course, I'm biased.
Certainly. And but you're not a fan of the accountability model. You're not being accountable. You're coaching.
You've been doing your homework, man. I am not a fan of accountability in coaching. So let me explain why. So you come to me because let's say you're trying to reach a goal or something's going on and it's like causing you a great deal of frustration. You've been trying to work through it like for a while now on your own, and you haven't been able to make any progress, right? So you're kind of frustrated. Would you agree?
Certainly, I could
Okay,
get
so
there.
that's typically why people come for coaching, and they sign up for coaching, and then the coach says to them, here's what we're going to do. We're going to identify your goals, and we're going to break your goals down into manageable components. And I'm going to hold you accountable to make sure that you do all the things in this plan so that you reach your goals. So, a couple of things happen. First week I say, okay, here's what I want you to do. And you do what you need to do, right? And everything's good. You seem to be making progress. And you know what? This relationship is great, right? You start reaching your goals and you're like, wow, Kim's amazing, this accountability coach, right? She's amazing. I'm reaching my goals. And I'm like, okay, well, you're good now. See you later. And what happens is all of a sudden you feel like you're lost without Kim. And now what do you do? And so you don't feel good. So you call Kim and you say, you know what? Let's coach some more. And so what I've done effectively is created a system of dependence.
Hmm.
And from my standpoint, that's not the goal. The coach's goal is to create independence, not dependence. So, from that point of view, it's a little bit unethical, right? I shouldn't create a system where you need me in order to achieve your goals. That's not a good that's not a good thing. But it gets even better. So, let's say you start doing all the things on your plan, but then one day you're like, "Well, I got busy this week. I was overwhelmed. I didn't do my homework." And I'm like, "What do you mean you didn't do your homework?" And it starts to feel a little weird, right? Because like I'm like supposed to hold you accountable, and you're not doing all the things that you promised you'd do. And you came into coaching because you didn't feel good about not being able to reach your goals. And now you're still struggling to reach your goals because you're not
Hmm.
doing all the things. But now you paid me to coach you, to like hold you accountable and say, hey, Joey, you promised. And you end up feeling, I would say, worse than when you
Right.
started. And so I had great intentions to help you reach your goals. And we created this structure of accountability. But what I really did was I created a bigger problem for you. So not only did you feel bad coming in, now you feel worse because you spent all this money, you made a whole bunch of promises, and you didn't follow through. So my purpose as a coach to help you feel better, to help you reach your goals on your own, to help you address some of the things that are holding you back, I didn't achieve. And what I really did was I created a much, much bigger problem for you. And now you're further behind than when you started. That doesn't feel good. So, from my perspective, at best, the accountability model in coaching is unethical. And at worst, it's detrimental. I've caused you harm. And I don't want to be any part of that. I don't need to hold you accountable. I need to figure out why you're not showing up in an accountable manner. I need to figure out why you're not holding yourself accountable. I don't need to be an extra problem or an extra person you need to answer to. From my standpoint, the only person you need to answer to is yourself. And why aren't you doing that? And that's what I'm interested in.
Would you advocate peer groups and peer advocacy?
I love peer groups, but I don't like the idea of peer groups for the purpose of accountability. So, like this whole accountability buddies, I think they, start working off well and then they always fizzle out. They don't work
Right.
well in the long run typically. So I'm not a fan of that. I love peer groups because peer groups allow you to look at things a little bit differently, think about things a little bit differently, process things a little bit differently. And so the benefit of a peer group is for you to say, here's what I'm challenged with. And people around you say, well, have you thought of this? Or if they ask you a specific question, you're like, wow, that question's interesting. I never even thought of that as an issue, right? So peer groups help you think better. That's what I like about peer groups. I don't like them for the purpose of accountability. I like them for the purpose of helping you work through problems and see things from a different perspective.
Yeah, I've been in peer groups for quite a while, and yeah, accountability would be a small part, but it's mostly of getting yourself away from the business and looking at it, see what others are doing, especially when we're in similar businesses. And I found it very beneficial. There was get to a certain point where it starts getting a bit stale and predictable, and you have to kind of shake things up a little bit. Uh, so, why are you not a fan of empathy?
I think empathy is one of the most misunderstood terms that I've ever experienced. So, um, I did an undergraduate degree in psychology. I learned all about empathy, but more importantly, I learned what the term empathy means.
Hmm.
I think a lot of people don't really know what the term empathy means. They think it's like being kind and being nice and, being thoughtful and caring about someone. And that's not what empathy means. Empathy is not an intellectual activity. Empathy is really an emotional activity that you're doing. And let me be much more specific. Empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of another person and feeling their emotional state. So it's a feeling exercise. It's not an action you do. It's not a thing you say. It's an emotion, right? When I feel empathy, I feel what you are feeling. So now, is empathy valuable in coaching? Well, here's the thing: if you're struggling, if you're suffering in any way, and I feel empathy, then I feel your struggle and I feel your suffering. So let's put it a different way. If you are drowning in a pool, and I like this exercise, if you're drowning in a pool, how do you feel?
Unpleasant.
You're scared, you're panicked, you're
Yes.
breathless, right? You're in a state of panic, right? It's not a good
Yes.
feeling. And if I empathize, if I see you drowning and suddenly I have empathy, now I feel scared, panicked, breathless,
Hmm.
desperate. And if I feel scared, panicked, desperate, breathless, am I in a position to help you?
Yeah, you're no. Yeah, you can't help.
I'm useless, right? I can't help you.
Hmm.
And so when I feel empathy when you're suffering, I've literally jumped in the pool right beside you and started to drown right alongside you. And so, what I need to do is I need to have compassion. Compassion works a
Hmm.
little differently than empathy. Compassion works like this: I see someone drowning, I say, oh my God, he's drowning, he needs help. But I don't jump in the pool with you. I stand solidly on the side of the pool and I give you a stick or I lean down and I pull you out. In order for me to be able to do that, I have to have clarity. I have to have my wits about me. I can't have empathy. I have to be able to envision you safely out of the pool. Empathy clouds all of that ability. Empathy clouds leadership, empathy clouds coaching. Again, I'm not saying don't have compassion. I'm not saying don't be a caring human being. I'm saying be caring, but also have clarity about how to help someone get from point A to point B. Don't jump in the pool with them and don't start drowning right beside them. And what happens is you both drown, right? So most people don't understand this concept of empathy. When you ask 100 people in a room, do you think a good leader has empathy? Every single one of them will raise their hands because they
Hmm.
don't understand it. It's a misused term. It's and it troubles me, to be honest.
I can sense that. How much of a role does discipline play in leadership?
So I know you're the discipline guy. So here's where we get to
Wow.
debate, right?
Yeah, I've never been labeled as such, but sure.
You are, right? You're the discipline guy.
I like to think so.
Okay. So I um if you ask people, the idea is, does discipline sound like fun? It often
Hmm.
doesn't sound like fun. Doesn't sound like fun. And and what happens is that people feel like they have to muscle up to do the things they need to do in order to reach the goals they need to reach all the time. And so, do I believe in consistency? Yes. 100%. I believe in consistency. Every day you got to show up. However, and I'm kind of trying to explain this in a way that I've never explained it before. So bear with me for a minute.
Love it.
Discipline doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, and
Hmm.
discipline also feels like, you know, I don't know how old you are, but maybe you saw the
52.
movie An Officer and a Gentleman,
Certainly.
and when Richard Gere messed up, Lou Gossett Jr. got in his face and made
Yes.
him, I don't know, scrub the floor with a toothbrush,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When he wasn't disciplined. And so I'm not a fan of punishment. I'm not a fan of beating someone up. I'm not a fan of any of that. And so I feel like discipline often falls into the category of punishment and rules and
Mm.
regulations and clear lines and boxes and boundaries and things like that. And I'm not a fan of that. I always want to move someone towards taking action from a place of inspiration as opposed to the rules and the regulations. That's not to say I don't believe in consistency. I believe in consistency. I prefer inspiration over discipline. And I also, and I think this is very, very important, I know that the human condition is to fall off track. And what I see consistently is that when people fall off track, one of two things happen. They completely fall off track. They're far gone. I'm off. Forget it. I've blown it. Let's forget about that. Or they take a stick and they start beating themselves up,
Hmm.
both of which are not useful. And so, what I encourage people to do is to say you've fallen off track. It's a human condition, it'll happen. Get back on track. No stick, no beating yourself up, no disciplinary measures, none of that. Just get back on track. Continue. Let's continue. We don't have time for all that. You don't have time to beat yourself up. You don't have time to punish yourself. You don't have time for that. It takes up too much energy. Just let's get back on track. And I feel like it's a little bit lighter. And I like approaching life with a little bit of levity, a little bit of
Hmm.
lightness. I often tell my clients, put your stick down. It's not it's not helping you. Put your stick down.
Hmm.
And for me, discipline and sticks kind of sort of go together. So I'm not a huge fan of using that as a way to get to where we need to go. So I often feel also that discipline is hard to maintain over the long run without falling off.
Interesting. Now that you heard yourself express that, do you like that? I
I like
understood it
it.
very well.
I like it. I agree with it. I mean, I'll get better at saying it, but I agree with that. What do you think?
Well, it's fascinating to me the different definitions that people have. Like you have, it seems to have you kind of have a militant, very structured, highly structured definition of discipline. When I was 340 pounds after starting a business and lost track of things, I said, oh, my daughter was born. The doctor said, you're pre-diabetic. If you don't make some changes, you're not going to see your daughter. So I started working out every day. I half of what I did. I stopped eating sugary drinks. And so everybody wants to know how I lost all the weight. And the simple word is discipline. Came to a certain point and I had to reverse the way things did and I had to stick to it. And so I just kind of uh, look at it that way, more of it's just a shift of perspective and let's just continue that way. I don't really have another word. Perhaps there's a bit of, certainly a bit of compassion. I wouldn't have done it if if my daughter wasn't born, perhaps. But I love the way that people kind of take discipline. You almost use it as a noun versus a verb. You have to do this. You brought up Richard Gere and an officer and a gentleman in the military there. It's fascinating to me, and I love the way it's a. I don't know. Is it a spectrum? Everything's on a spectrum these days. Is discipline on a spectrum? I
Well,
wonder.
here's the thing, okay? Well, let's play around with this for a minute more, if you don't
Yeah,
mind. When you think about the term discipline, it often applies to disciplining your children, right?
not in my case, but I
Okay,
could see how
okay,
that is.
but usually when we think of the word discipline, we think about it in terms of parenting, and we think about it in terms of a tool we use to keep our kids in line. So if they do something that is wrong or disrespectful or disobedient, even that term kind of is interesting, right? We use disciplinary tactics to adjust or correct their behavior. And what's very interesting about that is that when we exert discipline on someone else who's in charge, the parent, and what parents really want is for kids to have self control. But when we create this disciplinary model of raising our children, we remove control from our children. But we really want our kids to, like, behave in ways and make great decisions, and um, be able to have a sense of self-worth and self-confidence and all of this. And discipline kind of contravenes that. It
Hmm.
undermines that. Okay, so when we think about discipline, but what does the word discipline mean? What does it mean? It's it's a derivative of the word disciple, teaching, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah. And so if we use the word correctly, which is I will teach you, I will guide you, there's a softness to it. There's a forgiveness, right? Attached to being a really great teacher. So when I'm a really great teacher and you made a mistake, I don't shame you. I don't blame you. I don't call you names. I don't do any of that. The problem is that when people make mistakes, they use disciplinary tactics. They do blame, shame, and call themselves bad names inside their
Generally
heads.
speaking. Yeah.
And so the problem from my perspective is that when we think about discipline, we often think about having the muscle to always behave the right way. And when we fail, when we fall short, when we make a mistake,
Hmm.
what happens is we go back to the blame, shame, calling ourselves names game. Ooh, that was good. Right? And for me, I would prefer them to use the the softer teaching approach, to say you made a mistake. Okay, come on, let's get back on track. I remember when my
Fascinating.
daughter was young, and you now know my daughter, but she was, I don't know, 7 years old or something like that. And we had a counter in the kitchen, and she had a chair, and she was kind of standing on the chair. I said, okay, let's cut some strawberries. Just cut the green part off of the strawberry. I showed her how to do it. And, she cut one, she cut two. And on the third one, she cut her finger.
Uh-huh.
And she went, Mom, right? And she got really, really scared. And I'm like, what happened? I cut my finger. I'm like, okay, let's go clean it up. Let's put on a band-aid. And I'm like, okay, you have more strawberries to clean. And she looked at me like I was crazy. Like, you're going to trust me to cut more strawberries? I said, yeah, you have work to do. Right? Why we have more strawberries to cut? She thought that she removed herself from the game. She made such a terrible error that I would
Hmm.
never again trust her with a knife. But I did the exact opposite. What did I do? I built her up instead of knock her down. But that's not what we do with ourselves. When we make a mistake, we say, oh, you're so stupid. How could you do that? You should know better. And for me, that's the trap of discipline.
Hmm. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And you give another example in one of your videos when you were speaking about coming in with your son and he doesn't look like he's doing anything and he's not productive and you make assumptions and then later you find out that he was actually quite productive.
Yes.
And it
So
was another teaching moment.
it was a huge teaching moment. So um, in fact, I use that example, and I'll share that example in a minute, to teach people step one in coaching. And step one in coaching is suspend your story, check your story at the door. And so the story is this: I came home from work one day. It was a long day. I walk into the living room, and my son is lying down on the couch, on a leather couch. His shoes are on the couch. He's lying down on the floor. There's empty chip bags, an empty bottle of water, there's paper towel, there's a broken iPad. It's a disaster, just a total mess. And he's lying down there like he's the king of the universe, and he has a computer on his chest, and he's doing something, who knows what. And on the armchair, on the arm of the chair, I see two orange somethings. And as I came closer to the armchair, I noticed that those two things were cheese, directly on the leather couch. And so I walk in,
What's
and
the
this is
problem?
the scene I see. And to be honest, like what was going on in my head was exploding,
Mm.
right? I'm thinking, who does this kid think he is? Where does he think he lives? In a barn? Like, honestly, this is what I raised. But I had to check my story at the door. I had to suspend that story. And so I walked in and I said, "Hi, Lewis, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm designing a skateboard for my sister." And so all the things that were running through my head, he's lazy, he's self centered, he's self
Inconsiderate.
absorbed, all of those things flew out the window, right? And so I went to the kitchen, I got a plate, I put the cheese on the plate, and I said, "Show me your work." And he showed me this incredible design that he was working with. And so the lesson is a few things. Always assume positive intent, but know that whoever is in front of you, those people want to be seen in a good light. Those people want to succeed. There is really no such thing as a lazy person. There is really no such
Hmm.
thing as someone who's not driven. There are many people who haven't found their groove. There are many people who are lost. And there are many people who have a ton of beliefs that are really seriously getting in their way.
A moving moment. Yeah, and the crowd loved it too. Kim Ades, yeah, you're a delight. I'm so happy that there's people like you doing great coaching out there and making better leaders. It makes me feel great. And thank you for your time today. And tell us, how can we get in touch with you? Tell us about your app, your site, your
All the
social media,
things.
please.
So
Yes.
the way best way to find me is go to frameofmindcoaching.com. You can sign up to have a conversation with me, do all the things that you want to do. But frameofmindcoaching.com, there's the podcast that you spoke about. It's on there. We have our blog. And all kinds of information about our coaching. But I do want to share something that we're launching very, very soon. It's a program, it's coaching specifically for young
Hmm.
people who are going through all kinds of life transitions, whether it's moving out of the house, trying to figure out their career, dealing with relationship issues, all the things that young people, anxiety, stress, all the things that young people are dealing with. And it's accessible coaching for young people. And it's called thejournalthattalksback.com. And we're launching it very, very soon. And so if anyone has a young person in their lives, please take a look. It's again, thejournalthattalksback.com.
Excellent. Kim Ades, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I continue not only to learn when I watch your videos, but learn more when I talk to you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your program.
You be well.